Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Guilty as Charged podcast. My name is Steven, and I am the host, as always. Excited to dive into some potential secondary free agents tonight for the Chargers. Should be a fun conversation. I think this is a really underrated need for this team that not a lot of fans or analysts are really talking about. So we're going to mostly focus on some cornerbacks, but we'll get to a couple of safeties. And joining me to that is my guy, Tyler. Tyler, what's up, man? How you doing tonight?
Doing very well. I'm glad you mentioned that at the top of the show here because it's quietly been the position group that no Chargers fans are really talking about, or most Chargers fans aren't talking about, whether that's free agents or the drafts, and then specifically at 22. Both, I think, are absolutely in play. I've said it a million times. I've said the slate of receivers they are set to face this year.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they're ready to take on all those different receivers, different options, different X receivers this year. And we saw they ended their season partially because couldn't stop Nico Collins. Can they stop all these guys on their schedule? I don't know. But hey, they had one of these guys, draft some players. They're probably in a good spot.
Well, I feel really good about how reasonable and realistic we are being throughout this offseason. Sure. Unlike Packers fans, who I spent the better part of the morning arguing with, that they think the Packers are a legit Super Bowl contender despite losing also by double-digit points in the wild card round. Yes. But they really get to hang a batter because they played the Eagles tougher than the Chiefs. So I feel good about where we're at. We're being, even killed throughout this whole offseason. And once they sign players, I'm sure we'll be very, very hyped. But I did not realize the delusion is that high in Green Bay. So shout out to you Chargers fans for not being like Packers fans. I appreciate all of the offseason conversations. And I don't have to, do are the Chargers a contender every single day like the Packers fans apparently get to do. So shout out to you guys.
Yeah, 2025, the year of Steven versus Cheeseheads. I guess if you've got nothing to do but eat cheese and shovel some snow, maybe that's how things turn out for you. But you're the third best team in your division, and you might be fourth best depending on how Ben Johnson does.
Yep.
So, hey, go for it. Even Broncos fans, maybe similar-ish situation, third place in their division. Even they're not like, oh yeah, they're not hanging banners. So, okay, if that's what they want to do, great, that's fine. We are going to discuss some former Packers on this show today. So, hey, if they work out here and not over there, whoops.
And the Chargers have had a great history of signing former Packers. Potentially, I think Khalil probably has passed like the best veteran addition for the Chargers that Tom Telesco ever did. But Casey Hayward, man, pretty good signing for the Chargers. Worked out pretty well. So I'm excited about this conversation. I think we should probably set the stage similarly to how we did the previous episode with the offensive line conversation, because I think everybody can agree that the Chargers got two really, really outstanding values in the fifth round this past season in Tarib Still and Cam Hart. I mean, Tarib Still got a Defensive Rookie of the Year vote this year, which is kind of crazy to me. We don't have to rehash the past. If you guys listen to the show, we were not like the biggest fans of Tarib Still in that selection, but he's proven to be a very, very valuable player for this Chargers defense. Cam Hart, we were big fans of, and he had a good rookie season. Unfortunately, did battle through some injuries. The Chargers got some, I think, better play with Christian Fulton than I think most people expected. I know, like, the fan base kind of turned on him a little bit towards the end there. The penalties being the key thing there. But I think what we learned with the secondary in year one of the Jesse Minter experience is that they are going to be so well coached, and the communication is going to be at such a high level, and they're going to be so prepared that the question isn't like, can the Chargers get good cornerback play? It's really like, what kind of resources does this team actually want to give Jesse Minter to deal with? Is this kind of we're just going to, take some day three dart throws every single year and Jesse Minter is going to get good play out of them? Or is this an offseason where we could see the Chargers and Joe Ortiz give Jesse Minter some really high-end resources, again, maybe in one of the expensive free agents we're going to talk about, maybe a pick at 22. And instead of, well, he's done it with, the fifth rounders, maybe this team is looking at it and going, hey, let's see what Jesse Minter can do with a high-end cornerback, and let's jumpstart this secondary. I think is more of the question, as opposed to, the Chargers are in a bad spot or the Chargers need to do this or that. for me, it's just a curiosity of what does Joe Hortiz actually want to give Jesse Minter to work with.
Right. And then do we believe after 1 year, and I do, I have no reason not to, but do we believe that Jesse Minter can consistently work with guys that are day 3 picks, very inexpensive free agents, and turn the defense into one of the best pass defenses in the league? Can that happen year after year after year? I have, again, no reason to not believe he can't do that, but I don't know. I want to see 1 more year of that. And then do you want to find out? Do you want to find out the hard way in the postseason, or in a gotta have it game, or whatever? So it is definitely an intriguing conversation because, no Fulton currently, no Asante Samuel Jr. does not seem like he'll be back. So you have 3 pieces that I think no matter where you're at with them, you feel good about having them on the Chargers.
Right.
Whether you're a starter or not, you feel good about Hart, you feel good about Steele, still feel good about Leonard. And those 3 guys, in theory, could be a starting trio. And if they decided to do that going into the season, I would almost get it because I believe in Jesse Minter, even though I'm still concerned. I do want to see that happen, but I don't know if you can officially trust those guys because each one of them has their own question marks. I do believe there's one, no matter where he plays, starter in there with Tarheeb still. Like, I do believe he is a starter next year, no matter what. The question really, what do you think of Cam Hart? And not even necessarily what do you think of Cam Hart, but do you think he is someone you can rely on to be your starter for next year and seasons beyond because of his injury history and now concussion history with last year? And not that he would necessarily carry over concussion symptoms from year to year, but it is 2 in 1 rookie season with a shoulder injury coming out of college, multiple injuries last year. So what do you do? And Dean Leonard, of course, we haven't seen a ton of yet. So it's a tricky situation because I could completely believe if Joe Hortiz says, we believe in these guys, and Minter says, we believe in these guys, I believe in Minter, they're going to be good. I'd believe them. I'd also completely understand if they go, we want to pour more resources into this group because this is Jesse Minter's bread and butter. Like, how much better can this defense get against the best offenses? Against, let's say we run this back again against the Bengals, and let's say the Ravens, well, that's more of a Derrick Henry thing, and the Houston Texans and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers from last year.
Yeah.
Avoid those games by investing more in the secondary.
Yeah.
The thing is, how good is that secondary going to be with the state of their pass rush, which is that's a long topic, whole episode, but they may not have Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack next season. Technically, they're projected to have neither. They have to re-sign Khalil Mack or do something like that. But right now, there is no Khalil Mack, and I don't believe there's any Joey Bosa after a cut. So what does that look like for their secondary? Can they have the same kind of production? So tricky debate for sure.
Yeah, I think part of this is figuring out, for me, it's more so the floor for these 2 players, because I think we saw really high-end glimpses from both Tarheeb Still and Cam Hart. You look at, the Falcons game obviously being like the main one. And to me, Tarheeb Still's best game was the Browns game. Like, that was where I came on the show and was like, this dude, like, this is like high-end potential starter stuff. But then there were also some times where, we just didn't really see him, I think, as consistent as we really needed him to be, which again is to be expected of a 5th-round rookie. There were other games where he just flat out was like not targeted. So I think we've seen the flashes now for Tarheeb. I think we need to figure out what the floor is for him. And year 2 is obviously going to be really crucial there. And for Cam Hart, it's really just, can he stay on the field? Because I think his ceiling that we saw in the Saints game, in the Bengals game, in the Bucks game, where he was out there and going toe-to-toe with those guys, shows that he can be a capable starter. But if he's going to deal with concussion issues, shoulder issues, his entire, rookie contract, then that's just not somebody that the Chargers are going to be counting on, unfortunately for him. It could turn into a potential like Joshua Palmer situation where he's more of a fill-in starter versus somebody who could be a potential like CB1 on this team or elsewhere. So, I'm hopeful that the concussion and shoulder issues are not going to stick around, but I do think the Chargers probably have to plan to have some competition at that spot. I think you feel comfortable with Tarheeb Still playing and starting somewhere, but I think the Chargers have to make some kind of addition to start, or at least challenge to start, and figure out what the best combination is. So I I love what Cam Hart has shown. Dean Leonard has shown some good things in his limited work, but he also has struggled to stay healthy. So the Chargers have some work to do in the secondary, particularly at corner. And I think for me, when I'm talking about like general strategy, I think there has to be some kind of veteran addition here in this cornerback room. It doesn't necessarily have to be an expensive one, although we can talk about them here in a second. But right now, the Chargers have 4 corners, so I think are going to be on the roster in the two former rookies, Dean and then Jasir Taylor, who I know everybody wants to cut, but at minimum, Jasir Taylor is a potential core 4 special teams player, and he's a nickel cornerback who can be a backup nickel with a lot of experience. I think that's fine. So those 4 guys are going to be on the roster, and traditionally you carry 6 corners on your 53-man roster, and so they have room for 2 veterans if they want to explore that route, if they want to do a veteran and a rookie. But I really would like to see them sign a veteran of some level, because this cornerback room is very, very young. I mean, right now your most experienced corner is Jasir, and it's not exactly been like amazing experience this entire time. So I really would like to see them sign a veteran in the cornerback room just to kind of stabilize things, have a leader in that room, and be able to bring, some high level experience to the table. Again, it doesn't have to be a high end player, but somebody who's been there, done that, I think would be really valuable for this young group overall.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think they do have to bring in a veteran in some capacity. If it's a CB1, a CB2, a depth guy, 2 of the 3 of those things, got to bring in some veteran secondary help there. And then I am curious what and how their plans shifted with Still and Hart, because neither of these guys was starting to begin the year.
Yeah, they were both backups.
Right. They were, and if everyone was healthy, it was going to be Asante Samuel Jr. the whole year. We weren't going to see much of either of these guys. And so it was only because of injuries and several injuries that these guys were even on the field. Now, of course, then you see them, and I can't imagine they would go, let's take them off the field. Although they did have Jasir Taylor playing a lot when Tarheeb still was out there. So I don't know.
Yeah. Jasir is under contract for those who are saying others. I know people want to cut him, but at minimum, he is a valuable special teams player. And I think for this team that works. Like if he's your CB6 and one of your core gunners, like I think that's fine.
Yeah.
The safety room, I think, is much more set in stone. Obviously, you have Derwin James and Alohi Gilman, and for whatever reason, fans are pretty down on Alohi Gilman. But this is a guy that the Chargers believed in. He was signed to an extension by this current regime. They did not have to come in and sign Alohi Gilman to an extension. And it's not like the biggest extension in the world, but they signed him to a 2-year, $10 million contract. It's not nothing. And then all offseason long, we heard about how the Chargers felt like they had the best safety room in the league because of those 2 guys. And so the Chargers safety 3 is essentially a starter. And so it is a very important position. I think we're both on the same page that we would just like to see Elijah Molden brought back. And I believe the team is working to make that happen. But there is also a chance that Elijah Molden wants to potentially go look for a starting spot somewhere else. There's also a chance that he doesn't make it back from the injuries, plural, because he did have a knee injury and the broken leg in time for training camp. We don't really know enough about his recovery time. So I do think, for me, I want Elijah Molden back, but it is a question mark for the offseason that the Chargers are going to have to figure out. Do they want to bring in a veteran? Do they want to draft somebody, on day 3, day 2, whatever the case may be? I haven't really done a ton of work on the safeties, but safety 3 is an extremely important position for this team. And while Tony Jefferson was a nice story, I'm not really banking on him as the 3rd safety. I would like to see somebody else at that spot, and Jefferson can be your 4th safety or 5th safety after that.
Yeah, I don't see how they don't draft a safety at one point. They have enough picks too. Like I think they're going to have to draft a safety because they don't have much long-term outlook at that spot after Derwin James. Like Derwin James, he's set. You can get extension, restructure. What they could do something with his contract. I don't see him going anywhere, especially with how he played the second half of the year. It's Gilman with, I believe, just the 1 year left, or is it 2 years?
Just 1 more year.
So 1 more year with him. If Molden comes back, it's probably a 1 year deal. Jefferson, it's definitely a 1 year deal. So I think at some point you do have to draft somebody. So I think you get the 4 guys, that Molden and Jefferson come back. You draft the guy. If Jefferson has to do the practice squad thing, then active roster thing, kind of like he did last year. Okay, I get that. But I think they will end up having to draft somebody because there's no long-term outlook in this group.
And Derwin had an awesome season, but he is not getting any younger, which is crazy to say about a 28-year-old. But he's played a ton of football for this team. There's obviously been some injuries in the past, which thankfully he seems to have gotten over. But safety in the draft, I think, is a smart bet just because you need some long-term assets there. But I do think they should look into free agency to secure that safety 3 spot. Otherwise, Derwin James doesn't have the season he had this past year if he's not able to play in the slot and in the box as much. And so if he has to go back to playing, traditional safety, it kind of limits what the value you can get out of Derwin James. So we'll see what happens. For those wondering, we are not really going to talk about the expensive safeties in this show because I don't know, man. Paying 2 safeties $20 million just doesn't really seem like a smart investment. So Javon Holland, be asking about him. Holland is awesome. I would love the idea of him and Jesse Minter's defense, but paying that kind of piece plus Derwin plus Alohi, it's not really how I would allocate resources. I think you are, in my opinion, you're looking at Elijah Molden or maybe a little bit lower for that third safety. I don't think it's really reasonable to pay 2 safeties high-end money. And you would have to convince that player to come in and say, hey, like this is Derwin's room. Whereas somebody like Javon Holland probably wants to be the guy. And so we're not really going to touch on the expensive safeties. But we are going to mention a couple depth options for this team.
Yeah, obviously spending a ton of money at any spot would be great for that particular position group, but I just don't, it's not feasible with this group, not with Derwin's contract and Alohi's. So with those two, what's it, $55 million, $50 million to the safety room this year, you just can't do that.
Yeah, unfortunately not. Great player, though. Loved him in the draft. He's been obviously awesome in the NFL, so wish him well. Hope he stays out of the AFC West.
No kidding.
All right, let's get to our free agent targets. Again, we always like to set the table. If you don't like watching that part, you can kind of skip ahead. But I think they're valuable discussions based on how this team should handle the offseason. So we are going to start with the top of the CB2 world is how I titled this area. There's not really a true star cornerback in free agency. Those players very rarely hit free agency because they're just extremely rare and valuable. There's really only probably 6 or 7 of those players in the league. So in free agency, you're probably trying to hit high-end CB2, which would be the Chargers CB1. But from a league perspective, this is more of a CB2 kind of world, if that makes sense.
Yes, and to clarify, it would be these players would be the Chargers CB1, just not like CB1 elite tier money.
Yeah, correct. First player up is DJ Reed, who's having a field day on social media. He thinks he is a CB1, to be fair, which I love the confidence. Again, cornerbacks, it's just a different breed. Like you got to have some kind of mentality to play corner. So this is a notable one. Obviously, there are several connections here, which we can get into. His previous contract that he signed with the Jets was 3 years, $11 million APY. And according to PFF, he's going to get a nice pay bump up to $14 million APY, which would have him, I think, just hovering around the CB10 market, if I'm not mistaken. And he is going to be available because he said so himself. He does not want to return to New York. Arjun, unfortunately, can't work some magic there. So DJ Reed will be available. The question for the Chargers is about fit. It's about the connections, and it's about the cost and everything like that. Which we can get into next here.
Yeah, my watching of corners so far, as best I can throughout the draft process, is I'm looking for players that are kind of like your Cam Hart, Darheeb Still, Christian Fulton. I think was like 5'11", so slightly taller to taller corners that play a certain way. If you've ever stood next to me, I'm bigger than DJ Reed. Just for clarity, now I'm a little fatter than DJ Reed. I'll tell you that.
188. I don't think I've weighed 180 pounds since I was like in 6th grade.
Thanks a lot. Anyway, so that's DJ Reed's size in a nutshell, which not necessarily, it has not been a hindrance to how he plays and his ability on the field. He's been of all the options on here, maybe the most consistent corner. Has been fantastic. Of course, he hasn't been the number one with the Jets, so that helps a little bit. But his production, his play, his performance has been great. My only curiosity is if he's at all a fit to compete here with to start here for the Chargers. Whereas I don't know if that's entirely their mold. How big is Marlon Humphrey?
Oh, he's probably like 6'1" or 6'2", I would have to guess.
That's probably the most they've invested in corner in some time. Marlon Humphrey, RAS.
He is 6 foot even.
Okay.
So his RAS is 6002. So basically he's 6 feet tall.
Yeah. I think Reed would be a thing smaller than Asante, at least in terms of height. I think Asante got a not an accidental height bump, but a surprising height bump in his pre-draft evaluation. Steven is 6'4". Yeah, I'm like DJ Reed with like way too much fat on me, but I'm basically DJ Reed.
Asante Samuel Jr. at the combine was 5'10".
Wait.
Oh shoot. I just had it up and I exited already.
So that's a good point, I guess. Like they were going to start Asante, although
180. So 5'10", 180. But again, they didn't pick him for what it's worth. Obviously.
Right, exactly. And then they went with the guys that were a little taller. So I was looking for anyone who's like 5'11", 6 foot, plays for a certain length. So that's not a big thing, but we're trying to make connections here. There's plenty of connections. So obviously Chad Alexander, he played here in high school, 2 years in college here. He was on Seattle with Will Tukuafu. Is that how you say it?
Yep.
Thank you. There's plenty of connections and crossover there. And I think that he would clearly be a good corner, I think, on this team because he's been pretty good everywhere and pretty consistent. Yeah. The question is just like, is he a fit? That's all.
Yeah, I think stylistically, I really like his potential flexibility with this team because he can play slot. Like that's how he started in his career. So he size-wise, he is a slot cornerback. Like he just has established this ability to have such high level ball skills that he can play on the outside, and he overcomes his lack of size with physicality, with the high IQ plays and things like that. And so you see on here, he had the 5th highest forcing completion percentage of any starting cornerback in the league this year. So there's legit like ball skills and production here. If you follow him on Twitter or see him on Twitter, he's had experiences going up against the best of the best. Now, with the Jets, to be fair, he gets to play opposite of Sauce Gardner, and so these other teams are probably not funneling their top receivers all the time to Sauce Gardner, and the Jets never really had them shadow. But with the Chargers, he would unquestionably be like the guy following, opposing number 1 receivers. He would be their best cornerback. So stylistically, I think it is a fit, but the size is a question mark. And I think if you sign DJ Reed, I think you kind of can manage the lack of size with Tarheeb still. The two of them can flip back and forth between the slot and playing outside because Tarheeb he would be a big slot corner for this team, given his size. And so I think they could manage the size, but I don't know if that's their preference.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, to your previous comment, he would be now Carlton Davis is going to get a bump in pay, I think. But he would be CB 14 on the APY with 14 APY. Yeah.
So that's kind of where the Chargers, I think, are going to be looking at in free agency. I don't think this is a, high end CB market, unfortunately for them. Most of the guys, like I said, do get resigned. So DJ Reed, to me, I think is the best overall cornerback on free agency market. The questions for me are more about size and physical profile fit more than anything else, because I think like timeline is great. He just barely turned 28. He's a really high end CB2.
Yep. There's
connections on the front office. There's connections to the coaching staff. It makes a lot of sense if they're okay with the size. Like if they prefer to get bigger at corner after having Asante and Fulton, if they want to get bigger, then obviously DJ Reed is not going to be their selection. But outside of that, I think this does check a lot of boxes for them. All right, next up here, we'll get Carlton Davis. You want to do this one?
Yeah, sure. So Carlton Davis was Was he traded to the Lions or
traded to the Lions? Yep,
traded to the Lions. Yeah, so traded to the Lions. They desperately needed any help, and he was pretty good for them. Has been pretty good throughout his career, mostly with the Buccaneers. This is definitely more of a fit. So their size, length, and the play style that kind of match. And what I think is an underrated part of Fulton's game, maybe not necessarily just in run play tackling, but Carlton Davis has the highest run stop percentage of any free agent outside corner. And I think that part of what was so alluring about Fulton really early on, and even when, returned from injury, is that he played hard downhill. Like he tackled, he rallied and tackled. And so Carlton Davis bringing that, I'm not saying that Reed doesn't and didn't do that, but Davis being able to bring that, I think is very important for this defense. And it's, guys that I look for. We had Cam Hart as a Harbaugh guy for similar reasons. Like he's a tall guy, plays well, coverage, all that sort of stuff, but he come up and hit guys. You watch the game against USC, he come up and hit guys. So Carlton Davis having that high run stop rate is really great. And I did not know this, that he was former college teammates with Chargers defense quality control coach Robert Muschamp. So very good pull there.
He also missed Josh Harris by 1 year. So
oh, no kidding. That's right.
I would imagine he at least knows Josh Harris. I don't know. I mean, Auburn connections do run pretty deep, but Robert Muschamp, the Chargers defensive quality control coach, was a tight end. So they didn't play the same side of the ball, but they lined up the exact same years and everything. So I would imagine there's at least some kind of relationship there. And this is just kind of an aside, but if you're a cornerback in general, like why would you not want to come play for Jesse Minter? Like he just showed that he can be this kind of, secondary guru. And so somebody like Carlton Davis or whoever, I think it's a really easy pitch. The question for me with Carlton Davis is not fit. It's not, is he worth the money? It's really like, is he going to be available? The Lions drafted 2 cornerbacks last year, obviously Terran Arnold and Ennis Rakestraw. Terran Arnold stayed healthy for the whole year. I think a little underwhelmed compared to what I thought he would be just based off of the numbers. But Ennis Rakestraw struggled with injuries all season long, unfortunately. He was another guy that we liked in the draft for this team, for the Chargers anyways. But can the Lions really afford to lose Carlton Davis when they have all of these other moving pieces from the coaching staff? And it's kind of been a thing we've talked about with some of their other potential free agents and things like that. So is he going to be available? I'm not too sure. It sounds like he really loves playing in Detroit, but maybe he wants to follow Aaron Glenn to New York. Maybe he wants to have a more, concrete connection. Maybe he wants to go back to Tampa Bay, who, it's funny, they traded him, and now everybody's like giving the Buccaneers a corner in the first round of the draft. But I love this fit. Stylistically, it makes so much sense. A lot of the same reasons why the Lions targeted him is because they wanted to play more man coverage. They wanted to press. They want to be physical. That's all the things that I think the Chargers want to do. And so I love Carlton Davis. I think he would be number 1 on my Chargers specific board. Yeah. Even though I do think DJ Reed is probably a better player, but stylistically, like this just makes all the sense in the world to me. The other thing, I don't know if you mentioned the concerns here, but he did fracture his jaw, which sounds extremely painful and not fun. And I think there were some other injuries early on in his career, but he's mostly stayed pretty healthy. But the season-ending jaw fracture, like I don't know what that's supposed to do for you long term, but like maybe that affects like how physical he is. I don't know, but he did end the season injured, basically, unfortunately.
Yeah, so I'd imagine it's not a huge concern moving forward, but it is something to mention that he did miss the rest of the season. Yeah, he fractured his jaw. Like that's a big deal.
Yeah. But I'd be a huge fan of this move. This to me is the guy.
Before we jump into the next tier, I am very curious because you had brought up in our trade candidates, Jair Alexander for the Packers. Where of these 2 corners or trading for Alexander does Alexander fit?
The Packers also might cut him outright for what it's worth. But just he's been mentioned a lot. So has Mark Andrews over the past couple of days. So I think I would probably have Jair after. I would still have Jair after Davis because there's just a lot of injury history there. Yeah, that scares me. And he's never really been like a run defender. The dude is absolutely like top end cornerback coverage material, but I do question the stylistic fit there. Whereas Davis and I think Reed also would check that box. So I would probably say Davis 1, Reed 2, Alexander 3 would be like my ranking of those guys.
Yeah, that's where I have them too.
Okay, cool. Before we get to the rest of our guys, we're a half hour in, so I have to tell you guys about our friends over at Prize Picks, the best and easiest way to consume daily fantasy sports. Unfortunately, I put some picks in on the NBA All-Star game, and they did not go well because I kind of forgot that they did that stupid format where they did like 4 different games. But that's okay. Prize Picks was still fun. It made me watch the All-Star game, unfortunately, I guess. I don't know, but it was a great time. So Prize Picks is the best and easiest way to consume daily fantasy sports. All you have to do is select a player or players in multiple statistics. Just do more or less than, and then there you go. That's it. You build a lineup that way, and you don't have to go 5 for 5 to win money. You go 4 for 5, 3 for 5, and you can still win some money. So go to prizepicks.com/guilty, code guilty. It does help support the show, and it does help support yourself. Again, that is prizepicks.com/guilty, code guilty at checkout. All right, let's get to the next tier here. These are pricey starters. There's a few good options here for the Chargers if these other guys are off the market. And we'll start with Rasul Douglas, who we'll see what happens here, but very experienced player. And you have him listed as the biggest potential veteran cornerback free agent, 6'15" and 209 pounds, nearly 210 pounds. So this is a long, big, physical corner that I think does make a lot of sense for their play style as well. His previous contract was 3 years, $7 million APY. PFF is projecting a pretty significant pay bump for him, which makes a lot of sense, to $13.25 million APY. Similar to the Carlton Davis thing, I don't know if the Bills really can afford to lose this player. They still don't trust Kaiir Elam. Christian Benford got hurt in the AFC Championship game. We don't really know where that's at. So is Rasul Douglas available? Not too sure. But in terms of stylistic fit, in terms of size, in terms of play style, I do think this checks a lot of boxes for the Chargers as well.
Yeah, this is a player that I advocated for the last time he entered free agency. Former Packer. I had Mike Kawano from Ohana Packers, I believe, jump on and talk about all different Packers free agents. And Rasul Douglas was someone at the time who I think was like one of the first times I ever did like stats-based composite rankings. And he's one of the number 1 guys of the free agent tier that year. So he's just been a steady, good presence that no one really seems to hang on to for very long.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate. Like he'd be on the Chargers would be his 5th team since entering the league. And part of that was just like stylistic and scheme fits and regime changes. So he never really found like a home. But he's still produced and been pretty good as a corner for several years now. He will be 30 this year. So he is a true like journeyman, starting to become like that older, like veteran corner sort of thing. But again, he's been good at different spots, which I think is also very appealing. You go here, you're good. You go here, you're good. You go to the Bills, you're good. Like the numbers have been good. He's a bigger guy. He doesn't miss tackles, 3rd best missed tackle rate of any corner in the 2024 season that started. He's played almost 1,000 snaps per year the past 3 years. So he's been available. He doesn't miss tackles. He's been productive every year, generally more like the per play stats than just like overall raw numbers.
Yeah.
So if he's available, to me, this is maybe because I'm holding on to something from years ago, but this is actually my favorite option for the Chargers. Not that I think he's the best corner available, but I just think he's been so consistent. He's got the right size profile. I'm happy to go after Rasul Douglas. And 2 years, 13.25. That's a little bit different too. It's only the 2-year deal. It's about as pricey as the others, but it's only a 2-year deal. So if it bombs, it's only 2 years. You know, you could potentially even cut him after this season if something goes wrong. But I don't think it will, because he's been consistent everywhere he's been. And I don't expect him to suddenly fall off of a cliff working with Jesse Minter.
Yeah, and it's not like he's been reliant on his athletic traits. I mean, you have on here, he's a 4.59 40-yard dash. It's not like he's, the fastest corner in the world, which is potentially a concern. But he wins based off of his length, based off of his size, based off of his high IQ, and that's always kind of been who he is. And so I think you have at least some confidence that he would play the duration of that contract. For what it's worth, when it comes to the run defense side of things, he has the 2nd highest run stop percentage of any outside cornerback in this free agency group, only behind Carlton Davis. So he is, again, a stylistic fit, a size fit. The Chargers do need this kind of veteran presence here. And cornerbacks are starting to play a little bit longer than previous cornerback regimes, if you will. Nowadays, kind of the cliff seems to be kind of hitting more 31-ish as opposed to 30, where it used to be a really like hard cap number. And I just don't think he is that kind of guy that would fall off, because he's never really been somebody who is a blazer who wins because of speed. Like, he wins because of his brain and because of his long arms. So I would be a fan of this. I don't know if he would be my top choice, but I can understand why you're at that point, just, given the stylistic fit and everything like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Next here is Mike Hilton. So we haven't talked a ton about slot corners,
right?
But Mike Hilton is the top slot corner available, getting a pretty significant pay bump according to PFF. Previous contract was 4 years, $6 million APY. Now this upcoming one, they are projecting 3 years, $11 million APY. So it is a hefty upgrade from a slot cornerback market. I believe that would make him the third highest paid slot corner in the league, if that does come to fruition. So is he available? We don't know. The Bengals are trying apparently to run everybody back. Their defense outside of Trey Hendrickson is legit horrible. And Mike Hilton is their second best player on defense, maybe depending how you feel about like Logan Wilson, I guess. Otherwise, I don't know, man. That defensive depth chart is probably the worst in the league right now. I don't know if they can afford to lose Mike Hilton, but I also don't think they can afford to pay Mike Hilton this kind of contract when they're going to try and do a franchise tag for T. Higgins, a long-term extension for Jamar Chase, a long-term extension for Trey Hendrickson. I don't know, man. That's a lot of money to go around. So I do think Mike Hilton has a pretty good chance of hitting the actual market.
Yeah, and if they franchise T. Higgins and do all that sort of stuff, it's not a whole lot of money left for them. It's funny that their best player is Hendrickson and he wants out or a new deal, and then Hilton could just flat out be gone. So that's rough times in Cincinnati for sure. We'll see how things go. But if their defense continues to be bad, that's fine. That means Justin Herbert keeps beating Joe Burrow. That at least makes me kind of happy. Few things make me happy during football season, like beating the Bengals or the Dolphins or stuff like that. I just don't know where they feel Tarheeb still is best. I kept waiting for them to do the permanent slot corner thing, but they never did. And there was also injuries. Like, okay, like here's the trio, and there goes Fulton. Here's the trio, there goes Cam Hart. So it was really like you never really could see what they were going to do there. And we'll talk about several safeties, slot corners, that sort of thing throughout the whole offseason. But how much is Derwin James involved in the slot this year?
Right.
If you're spending, let's say I don't know, they're not gonna, but let's say they go get Javon Holland. Derwin James is playing slot corner this year.
Yeah,
basically. So I'm curious how much resources they allocate towards that. Last year, Tarheeb still played almost 600 snaps on the outside, under 200 in the slot. So in theory, if Still's your outside corner and Hart's your other outside corner, you could pay for Mike Hilton. That could be your trio. Hey, I'm totally fine if they want to go get a good slot corner. I still think that could be Tarheeb still. I'd still probably prefer to pay an outside guy or draft an outside guy. But if you want to go after the best slot corner option available and go get him, make still your outside guy, okay, I get it.
Yeah, I think this is, for me, it would just be really fun. The vibes of Mike Hilton playing the slot for this team. He's very clearly like not the same coverage defender he was. His coverage grades have started to decline, and this will be his age 31 season. But he still is probably the best run defending cornerback period in the league. He had the highest PFF grade of any cornerback in the league in terms of run defense. He had the most total run stops by like a mile. Like it wasn't even close. And he had the second highest run stop percentage and the lowest missed tackle percentage of any corner with at least 10 tackles against the run. So this is a guy will absolutely make an impact against the run. And I think potentially having Mike Hilton would allow the Chargers to play, dime package on base down, essentially, if they really wanted to. It would just give them so much more flexibility from a schematic standpoint, because Mike Hilton can defend the run like a linebacker, essentially. So he's extremely productive as a run defender. He is extremely productive as a pass rusher. And I think we didn't really get to see what Jesse Minter wanted to do as a blitzer. And I think having somebody like Mike Hilton would allow him to do that more often, which I think he really, really wants to do.
Yeah.
So this is more of like a vibe check for me. I don't think they really want to pay $11 million for a slot corner, but the man can absolutely defend the run. He can absolutely wreck your game plan on defense as a pass rusher. So it just would be really fun, man. I think this is a potentially cool signing more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
There's no real like connections to the team that I could find, unfortunately. So this would just have to be like, we like this player, let's go sign him. Plus, there's the whole aspect of like you mentioned, Derwin playing the slot. Mm-hmm. Where does Tarheeb fit in? So there are some concern here, but I just had to bring it up just because I think it would be super cool.
Yeah, so Jaw Taylor led the way last year, not in terms of blitzes, but like slot corner blitzes and corner blitzes, but just 13. Tarheeb still just 6 times, Molden twice, Gilman twice, Hart once. You go get Hilton. You're not blitzing 13 times. 13 times before week 4, maybe.
13 times a game.
A game potentially for sure. So yeah, I think that would be a lot of fun. I didn't consider that aspect as much. I didn't realize the Chargers didn't blitz their corners as much. Granted, they blitzed Derwin James plenty. So that was totally fine. That worked just fine. Yeah. But having Hilton out there, I mean, Henley, James, Hilton, that's hell.
Yeah, that would be extremely difficult to sort through. And I just keep looking like I keep thinking back to the preseason, and there was that game against the Rams where they blitzed Tarheeb and Jaw and anybody else who was playing slot like 40 times, it felt like. That's probably extreme and exaggerated just based off of like what I remember. But, you know, having your main slot corners blitz like less than 20 times combined, I just don't think that's the way that Jesse Minster wants to coach that position. And so bringing somebody in like Mike Hilton would elevate that role, I think, and just give them, you know, some stability again. The price, I probably don't think is worth just like good vibes and how fun it would be. If it were that $6 million APY, I would definitely be about this, but $11 million for him, given what he has not produced as a coverage defender recently, is probably a bit much, but you know, tough to not bring up when we're talking about cornerbacks.
Yeah, so coverage, 421 yards. Hello, Lad McConkey giving him the hardest time throughout last year. Like, no surprise there, I guess.
Yeah.
So when was he drafted? Oh, he's an undrafted free agent. So former undrafted free agent, will be 31 in about 3 weeks. Slot corner. So maybe there is some bias against his contract, and maybe it is less than 3 years, 11 mil APY. So, but if that kind of comes into play, I'm all for it.
Yeah. All right. Next one here, we're gonna do starters on a budget. First one is a former Las Vegas Raider. You want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So he's mostly just been a thorn in the Chargers side, and that's why I had to bring him up. There's also some definite like connections there. He did play at Illinois with Dylan Roney when he was a defensive analyst over there at Illinois. We've seen what he can do the last 4 times he's played the Chargers, only allowed 54 receiving yards, which is, I think, pretty impressive. Another guy who can like flex outside if needed. There was one season, I think it was his second year, where he played, I believe, primarily outside. He's mostly been a slot guy since then.
I think his first year was like exclusively slot, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it was his second year. I don't know if there were injuries or whatnot, but he had to play more outside. So he could return because the Raiders did return Patrick Graham and things have worked there, and it's worked for him. So he could return. This is another guy who's very good as a pass rusher. He's had 70 rushes. He's had 18 pressures on those 70 rushes, which is pretty darn productive for the number of rushes that he's had. So it's a very inexpensive option. We've gone from, $11 million a year all the way now. We're just 1 year, $4 million deal. It's a very inexpensive deal. This is a guy that I think is really just going to be a slot corner. But again, with Hilton, kind of the same deal. 22.4 missed tackle rate in 2024 is not great. He did miss 4 games each of the last 2 seasons with an ankle injury. So again, it's not a great option, but it is an option with some overlap. And they've definitely seen him plenty of times. And I'd love to poach him from the Raiders, just get him off the Raiders. He's actually been kind of okay against the Chargers recently. So had to bring him up.
Man, he had a 9.6 RAS score.
Did not know that. All right.
So I think he checks the size potentially here, especially if he is kind of like a slot corner. He's a big slot if he is out there. He's 5'11" and 196, so that's good size. 40-inch vertical jump, 11 feet broad, ran a 4.48. Yeah, he's a good athlete, man. You mentioned the Illinois connection, obviously. The Illinois defensive backs, they've produce some good players for whatever reason. I would be a fan of him more in the slot. I think that's where he's played his best ball, but it is obviously valuable that he can play out wide. And I think this is kind of maybe a like worst case scenario in terms of like getting a starter who can play in the slot, and he wouldn't have the pressure of being like a full-time starter because of Derwin James.
Right.
So you could I think the Chargers could have some fun with Nate Hobbs. I do. The missed tackle rate is not great. But I think you could potentially solve that. I don't know. Maybe he's just been playing out of position. I'd have to go back and watch. But like physically speaking, I think stylistically speaking, he would make sense too.
Yeah, and potentially a third of the cost of Hilton.
Yeah, for sure. All right, next one on here is Jordan Lewis, with a lot more direct ties to this coaching staff as a former Michigan Wolverine. This is probably a slot cornerback as well. His previous contract was not a rookie contract. That is my mistake. That should be different because he's been in the league for 9 years now. It's been a while. But his contract projection is 1 year, $4 million as well. So pretty cheap potential starter here. He's been in Dallas his entire career, despite several different defensive coordinators. So there's a chance that he just wants to stick it out there. He's probably only got a couple more years left in his career. Does he want to uproot his family and things like that and move out west? I don't really know. But he is a former Michigan cornerback who actually during his junior season set the record for most pass breakups in the program's history with 22. And that record is still currently standing. That was Jim's first year back at Michigan in 2015. And when he was drafted, Jim Harbaugh said that even after Jordan was an All-American in 2015, he never missed practice in spring ball. He still improved to get better. Kind of embodied the TED aspect that we've referenced a lot on this show, that the Chargers have, plastered all over their training facility. So there are a lot of fond memories between the two of them. I did actually find a video of Jordan Lewis this past offseason after Jim Harbaugh signed with the Chargers. And he was like, man, that's my guy. That's my guy. I love him so much. I'm so glad he's back in the NFL. And then he re-signed with the Cowboys. So I don't know what to make of that, but there still is some really strong connections here between Jordan Lewis and Jim Harbaugh. Obviously, he missed most of the defensive coaches, because there was so much turnover with that staff. But still directly tied to Jim Harbaugh. A lot of good vibes there. He is coming off the best coverage grade of his career at 79. And he was fifth among starting slot corners in snaps in yards per snap. So that should say on the screen, fifth among starting slot in yards per snap. So very, very efficient slot corner. So this is kind of the opposite of Mike Hilton, where he's more of a coverage slot defender than a run defender or a blitzer. And he is definitely on the smaller side. But in terms of slot corners with connections, it's hard to beat Jordan Lewis.
Yeah, I think he was a player that we advocated for last year. We brought up all the Harbaugh ties, Michigan or Baltimore ties, in this case, just Michigan. So he's a player that we advocated for last year. Who am I thinking? Oh, I'm thinking of somebody later. Never mind. He does not have the same injury history as somebody else I'm thinking of.
Okay.
But I'm game for this one too. I'm completely game for this one. I think this is more realistic than someone like a Mike Hilton, especially given the contract.
Yeah.
I think I don't know. Like, do you want to hang out and be with the Cowboys and go down with that freaking ship right now? It sounds terrible. I get the vibes the last couple of years. Like, okay, there's a lot of like
run it back vibes in Dallas. Yeah.
Yeah. But like, it's like run it worse, like run it back, like run it back, but hit some things on the way out. And if they're seriously like, we're also going to get rid of Micah Parsons for whatever reason, and Osa is walking in free agency, you want to go back for that? Like, I just don't think that's the vibe you want to go for.
Sure.
Could be a lame duck head coach. Like, it's just, who knows with Jerry Jones. So he's been very loyal. I'm surprised he's been there as long as he has, but come hang out with Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah. I think again, it is dependent on the Tariq Still aspect of things, but if you want to just kind of stabilize the slot position cheaply, and then in the draft, you go find like an outside corner, which it seems like it's a good draft for that. This just would give you a lot of flexibility, I think. Next one in here is obviously a former Baltimore Raven, Brandon Stevens, previously on his rookie contract. His PFF projection is not available. He's not in their top 100. The Ravens, for all of their issues defensively in the first half of the season, they were like second in the league in EPA per play and success rate in the back half of the season. So there's a chance that they want to just run it back. That being said, they only have $5 million in cap space right now. So they got to make some moves. And that might mean somebody like Brandon Stevens gets to walk in free agency. You want to talk about size and versatility. I think it fits what Jesse Minter wants at that position. He started his career as an NFL safety. Now he plays exclusively as an outside cornerback, 6'1", good run defender. He's played over 2,000 snaps for the Ravens the past 2 years. The question is like, what exactly are the Chargers interested in terms of level of play? Because he kind of has been the guy that other teams have just like really gone after. Like it's kind of drawing to see that he's allowed almost 1,500 yards over the past 2 seasons combined, which isn't like there are worse corners, but it's not great. But in terms of just like, hey, we just need like a veteran body and maybe we can just kind of like have some draft flexibility. This I could talk myself into, but it's definitely a step down from like the Rasul Douglases of the world.
If you told me last year that Eli Apple would get meaningful snaps and play for the Chargers, I say go fuck yourself. So to me at this point, like if Jesse Minter's like, I want Brandon Stevens, I'll go, yeah, man, whatever you want, dude. Like I don't care what the history was. I trust you to make it work. With that said, yeah, 1,500 yards allowed. If you include the postseasons, over 1,700 yards allowed the last couple of seasons.
I was trying to be nice.
You were, I think it shakes out to about the same per game.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you look at the yards allowed and it's like 900 and 800, that's not really the great direction. But again, I trust Jesse Minter. If they're like, hey, we actually are going to roll with Hart and Still and Leonard, and we pay Mike Hilton, let's say, and we just got to get a veteran guy. Okay, I genuinely could buy it, but only specifically because it's Jesse Minter. If this were Brandon Staley and I knew exactly who Brandon Staley was, I'd say we're doomed. And I don't think I would not podcast some games, but because it's Jesse Minter, okay, I would buy it.
Yeah. And he was a previous Core 4 special teams player. So like worst case scenarios, you sign Brandon Stevens, and then you probably go draft somebody in the first 3 rounds, 4 rounds, whatever. And that guy's your starter, and Brandon Stevens is maybe competing for the 4th cornerback spot. That's a scenario I could definitely talk myself into. But so maybe this is kind of like the floor of, the Chargers potentially signing a veteran corner is Mr. Brandon Stevens.
I don't know what the timeline was, but this is like, okay, they have Tony Jefferson, like, that's all they got for their depth, but then they go get Elijah Molden. Like, I think they could do something like that. Like they have Brandon Stevens and we're going, oh, what? He started to do what for them? But then they go get somebody else. So
sure.
Can't imagine he's a starter for them. At that point, you should just bring back Christian Fulton. So, but I like the option being on here.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I would also rather have Christian Fulton, for what it's worth.
Yes.
Okay, next one here. Our probably backup players. This is where we're going to mention a few safeties, including another former Raven, Mr. Chuck Clark.
Yeah, this is the guy that tore his ACL and spent several weeks in IR this past season. So to start with, that kind of indicates where my brain is at with this player. But again, this is his previous deal was 1 year, $2 million. It's barely going to be that. Granted, they did lose, Chris O'Leary, so maybe there's some drop off in the safety room and play this year. I don't know. Tony Jefferson says that's the best coach he's ever played for. So maybe, some things aren't so great with the safety room, but there are plenty of connections here. This would clearly be a depth signing. Again, if you told me Marcus May was picking off Kirk Cousins in the end zone of a game where he didn't meet half of his teammates before he played that game, I'd say you're crazy. And yet they made that work. They made Eddie Jackson work. So again, Minter is doing a lot of early work for me and how I believe in these players this year. But I'd prefer other options that haven't been severely injured for 2 years in a row.
Yeah. So the high ankle sprain, ACL, not great for a safety about to turn 30. This is his age 30 season incoming. So definitely some concern there. I did like the fact that his snap distribution is basically like split right down the middle between free safety and box safety. And that his run defense grade was essentially the same with both. So there is some versatility here, but this is almost just like I would probably just rather play Tony Jefferson because he knows the defense and he's been here. But I think it's notable because like Chad Alexander was a part of the group that signed him. There's all of the Ravens connections, including playing for the Ravens while Jesse Minter was there. So Jesse Minter was like directly coaching him. And so this is a potential option, but I would definitely rather just have Elijah Molden back. But this is probably somebody to at least keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Another player we mentioned last year, same idea. Okay, I had no idea who this was. I can't believe he played 2,000 snaps the last couple of years, and I had no idea who he was. I really like this find by you. So you can either discuss it or I can share whatever you want, but this was a good find on your end.
Yeah, so this is Jason Pinnock, the safety from the New York Giants. His exact RAS comp is not anything close to that kind of player, but it is Kyle Hamilton. I went and looked this up. So his size profile is very similar to Kyle Hamilton. I think this is the archetype of safety that the Ravens have traditionally really, really liked. He was drafted by the Jets with Chad Alexander, obviously, so that's important. And then he played under Wink Martindale for 2 years. 1 year as a starter, 1 year as kind of a backup. Mm-hmm. And so this is a guy who fits the mold a lot of like what they want to do. He hasn't been like an amazing player. Like this is obviously a guy who's not in PFF's top 100. This is a guy who's not going to like change your defense, but he's played a lot of consistent football for the Giants over the last 2 years. He's been a core 4 special teamer. He's still relatively young. And so I think this is maybe the most attractive free agent option outside of bringing Elijah Molden back, because he does have that kind of resume that just kind of makes me think that this will check a lot of boxes for the Chargers. He's younger, he's faster, he's physical. You know, there's not any real injury history here. There are direct coaching and scheme connections to this regime. So Jason Pinnock, I think, makes a lot of sense for them. He's an intriguing, outside of the top 100 free agent for me right now.
Yeah, really good find. He did play with Tony Jefferson with the Giants for 1 year. I'm assuming they know each other. Hopefully they do. They play on the same defense.
Yeah.
But this was just a really good find for someone. I feel bad, but I did not know who he was before today. But he's been very consistent. Again, 2,000 snaps. He's got, 28 pressures and 7 sacks the last 3 years, so he can rush the passer too. Has been pretty good in terms of coverage, like only 270 yards allowed each of the last couple of seasons. I think this is quietly a very good, like Joe Ortiz kind of signing, where there are some connections as well and same kind of fits with the defense. I'm really buying this one. I'm really buying this one as an option for the Chargers. He seems healthy. There's connections. He's consistent. He'll be very inexpensive, I would imagine.
Yeah.
So I actually really buy this one. This is a good find.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons why I brought him up, I didn't realize this. He had a 9.78 RAS. Pretty athletic player. One of the reasons why I brought him up is because the bulk of his snaps do come as a free safety. And I think part of the reason why the Elijah Molden, Alohi Gilman thing worked is that Elijah Molden playing deep allowed Alohi to kind of play more in the middle areas of the field. And I think they do need that kind of complement to him to have somebody who can control the back middle part of the field. And then Alohi Gilman can kind of play the intermediate areas, or Derwin James. And so Jason Pinnock has that kind of range. He has that speed. You're at a 4.42. Like, this is a guy who is fast, physical. He just hasn't been given the chance to like really shine, and he hasn't had great coaching as much as I think Wink is kind of like the godfather of the Raven system. He's not Jesse Minter from like a defensive back standpoint. So this would make a lot of sense for me. I think this is probably my favorite Elijah Molden replacement. I still would prefer Elijah being back, but this is probably my guy after that.
Yeah, no, again, really good find here. Jorge believes in us so much that he's going to get GAC tattooed on his chest.
That's love.
Yeah.
Appreciate that, Jorge. Is
that
it?
One more here. Now we got one more. We've gone through several corners names this episode, whether they're one of these players or on the team of another player. We've talked about players that we liked in the pre-draft process that didn't turn out so hot. Elam being one of them. Arnold, we'll see how his career turns out. that was Stokes for me. Not that I had him as a top 1 or 2 option, but man, I did like Stokes. And it's been kind of a train wreck. This guy has been inconsistent at best to start his career, injuries for sure. And then he just flat out couldn't get on the field. So it's very much so a reclamation project, which is great for the Chargers and Jesse Minter and Joe Hortiz, because that's their speciality is these reclamation projects. I think, I don't know for sure, Eric Stokes' whole situation. And granted, why would he leave this future Super Bowl 2026 Packers? But I believe he's more overall talented than a Christian Fulton. I mean, this is a guy you when we're watching Jamar Chase and obviously watching Stokes, like you watch him play against LSU and he shut Jamar Chase down. So where did that guy go? I don't know. Again, injuries, not great. The defense with Joe Barry, like that has not been great either. So it's definitely a reclamation project. He wasn't able to get on the field. There's plenty of injury history, but this is a guy you could definitely buy low on. I don't think they'd expect him to start.
No,
there's a first round bias there where he might start for some teams, but I don't believe they'd ask him to start. And I wouldn't mind that at all.
Yeah, if this were last year for the Chargers, it's probably he probably would start.
Yeah.
But I'm just like, the Chargers are in a space where it makes a lot of sense for them to just try and take these shots, right? And we know that Joe Ortiz loves the compensatory pick formula. If you can get Eric Stokes to hit and then he leaves, that compensatory pick potential is very, very high.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately for him, I think just the changes in Green Bay and the amount of just lack of stylistic fit, because he went from, the most passive Vic Fangio scheme you could possibly imagine under Vic Berry to this coach, Jeff Hafley, who plays a lot of like cover 3 press. And it's such a stylistic change, which I do think he fits that kind of scheme. Like, I think he can press and get physical. I think that's why we liked him so much. But that's a really drastic change for people to get their heads around. So I think the Chargers could probably still afford, and not probably, they can still afford to go get one of the other starters. And then maybe Eric Stokes is kind of more of like, CB7 type, and maybe he fights his way onto the roster. But I'm just such a fan of taking these reclamation projects on, because there's no risk. Like, you're probably signing him to a minimum contract. And if he doesn't pan out, who cares? No one will bat an eye. But if they can get him back to playing like a functional starting corner with that draft pedigree, the comp pick potential here is tremendously high, because the first round trades don't just go away. Like, it didn't become less athletic. So this is just one I had to throw in, because I think the Ravens have always done this sort of thing where, every once in a while they'll just throw in some former first round pick who hasn't panned out. And if he doesn't hit, who cares? If he does hit, then you got a tremendously talented player who can showcase his talents in a better situation. So it's just really interesting to me. He's not a guy I'm signing to start, but as a potential CB5, 6, or 7, like, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, they have shown no issues with taking reclamation projects, no matter how bad. Granted, different roles for different players, but like Alex Leatherwood, they took a chance on.
Yeah.
And Hayden Hurst, more of a veteran thing, but they still try to make that work. Not that J.K. Dobbins, the reclamation project.
He kind of was. I mean, with all the injury history.
Fair enough. It was that one was definitely a risk. And if it didn't work again, it's okay. It was a 1-year deal.
If J.K. Dobbins didn't work, man.
Oh, dude,
that run game would have been horrible.
If J.K. Dobbins didn't work, I would have started on my pre-draft process so much sooner.
Yeah.
So I'm glad he was at least pretty good.
Yeah. All right. That was our last one here. So, like I mentioned at the top of the show, I think this is an underrated position need. I would really like to see the Chargers go and sign one of these players and just kind of stabilize the room a little bit. We're kind of the same mindset at the tight end position, where it's like, if you don't sign a cornerback in free agency, like, you probably got to take one early on in the draft.
Yeah.
And with the way that this draft is shaping up, I just think signing a veteran corner makes a lot of sense. One player that we did not bring up, who I really wanted to, is Charvarius Ward. I don't know if people listening are familiar with his situation. This past season, his daughter passed away. It was a 2-year-old. She was a 2-year-old daughter that passed away, and he said at the end of the season, very candidly, that he refuses to come back to the state of California. That coming back to the state of California is like so traumatizing for him and his family because of the memories associated with his daughter and the loss of his daughter, that he flat out is just like not interested in doing that. So I don't know if that applies to LA. I mean, that's a 7-hour drive away. But it is somebody who I'm interested in. I don't know really, like, that guy probably wants to get as far away from California as possible.
Yeah.
And I don't know if LA is the spot, but I love Charvarius Ward when he left the Chiefs. He was definitely somebody that I wanted to sign. I advocated for signing him over JC Jackson, which, seems like a pretty good take at the now going on, but there's unfortunately just a lot of life stuff that Charvarius Ward has to figure out. And I just don't know if he wants to play in the state of California.
Yeah, obviously, if he signs, great. Like it's kind of same tier as the other guys. Okay, great. You find yourself a CB2, maybe a high-end CB2, feeling good. But yeah, that's a whole personal different thing. That's entirely up to him and his family.
Yeah. So I love him, a fan of his, but we'll see how far away from California he wants to go. All right. Tyler, any other final thoughts on secondary pieces before we get to our last super chat and then we'll head out?
Nope.
All right. Dark Samus, true to character, says sign Will Carnes out of Fries, sign Ryan Kelly, draft Tyler Booker if there are no tight ends, edge, or defensive line, and Jared Wilson. He says Matt Money Smith and both Alexes like Booker.
I like Booker. I finally got around to watching him. I have no comparison to the rest of the class. I couldn't tell you if he's the best or the worst. I have no idea. I don't love him at 22. He might be the best guard to me by the time I get there. And it's not like he's a bad player, but I'd have to get a feel for the rest of the class. It'd be very hard for me to take a guard there over other players, though. So even if I end up having him as like a top, let's say 40 player, 30 player, let's say, I don't know if I like him more than some of the other options that are there. Some people have been bringing up Jade Barron in the chat. If he's there, God love it. I'd do handstands. Yeah, he was a lot of fun to watch, man.
He's a ton of fun, and he's a guy who can play slot. He can play safety. He's a ton of fun. That would make a lot of sense. There's just too many players I would like to select Tyler Booker at 22, and I understand, like, I'm probably lower on him than most people do, but there's too many quality defensive prospects for me to sign up for this. Like, I think he's an option for me at 55. He is not an option for me at 22. So I like the player. I am very uncomfortable with his current evaluation. Like, even today, Dan Jeremiah did his second mock draft, and he still had Tyler Booker going in the top 20. And I just don't get it. Like, there are real athletic concerns, and I don't think he is as powerful as he is projected to be. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I have watched his entire career and be like an Alabama expert, but I watched 4 games of Alabama offensive line, and I don't see a first round guard. I don't. You have to be truly special physically as a guard to be in the first round. It's one of the reasons why we like Zion Johnson so much, because that dude was a freak athlete. Booker's not that. He's not a power guy. To me, he's a second round comfortable prospect. And if they take him at 55, I'm very cool with it. I would totally understand it. But Donovan Jackson, the Ohio State guard, is like basically the same player. And he's like consensus top 60. Like, he's a consensus second rounder. And I don't understand the differences there. So I like him, just not in the first round.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I would agree there by the time I get to all of it.
Yeah. And I would agree with DJ that I would have Omarion Hampton for sure ahead of Tyler Booker if he was on the board.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. I don't love Hampton at 22 as my favorite option, of course. But given how Daniel Jeremiah's draft went, there were no corners, there were no receivers. Obviously, Genty was gone. Loveland went. That draft sucked, by the way, because it had McMillan, Loveland, and Genty going right before the Chargers. So given what else was there, I think Hampton would be best player available.
Yeah, that just was a really unfortunate board for them. I mean, Micah Williams, Kenneth Grant, Jahdae Barron went 17. Gray Zabel at 18, which is kind of crazy to me. Ted McMillan falling to 19 is wild to me. And then Loveland, Genty. You know, there's an argument you could take. I didn't really see a Darius Alexander at 26. In that situation, I would probably advocate for Shamar Stewart.
Okay.
But I get why you would take Hampton at that point. I mean, like a lot of players that went after him, Donovan Jackson, who I just mentioned, did go 28. I guess you could talk yourself into one of the receivers, maybe Matthew Golden or Emeka Egbuka, but yeah, that was an unfortunate board. So I like Hampton a lot. If that's the board, I would get it, but I probably would go elsewhere.
Yeah. Yep.
Next one in here from Crescendo. I'm going to send my dream realistic offseason curious on thoughts. So he sent us 2 super chats.
Okay.
So send us 1 question, which I really appreciate there. His dream realistic offseason says cut Bosa and Pipkins, extend Slater and James. So Derwin has 2 more years left on his contract. So I appreciate the creativity. You don't really have to do that part. Resign Khalil Mack, resign JK, Puna, Ford, Tier Tart, Elijah Molden, Bradley Bozeman. Sign Trey Jones.
Trey Smith.
Smith.
I think Trey and Jones may be 2 different people. Like Trey, Jones, and Slayton as 3 different people.
Which free agent is Jones?
I don't know. I'm just trying to help him out here. Jones.
I hope that's not Aaron Jones.
Oh, I mean, it could be.
Maybe. Anyways, he says, or Adams and Fries, Mark Andrews, Joshua Uche, and secondary depth. Draft round 1, Hampton. Round 2, 3 is defensive line and edge. And then rounds 4 through 7, he says BPA. So let us know who's. Oh, he sent in another super chat. Trey Smith. Okay. What are your thoughts about his dream realistic offseason?
I think overall, obviously, to start out cutting Bosa and Pipkins, that's pretty sure that's where they'll start. Slater gets a new deal. Great. James, maybe there's a change to the deal, but I don't think it's an extension. JK back, Puna Ford, all these guys back. Great. Bozeman, I think, is just an expectation to be back. If you told me what's my dream scenario, would it be Bozeman coming back? But that's it. It's all good. But will he be back? Probably. Sign Trey Smith. Great. Slayton or Adams and Fries. Thank you for being realistic there. So you spend money at one, got to budget the other one. So Trey Smith, Darius Slayton, or Adams, Will Fries. I like that. Mark Andrews, if he's cut. If Mark Andrews is cut, I understand there's a prisoner of the moment aspect with Mark Andrews and what happened in the playoffs, and I get it. That sucks. The guy is still a good tight end, and he's the best receiving option the Chargers will have had at tight end in a while. He's still, I think, top 8, as you pointed out today, in pretty much every metric you can think of.
Yeah.
Top 5 in some as well. Sure, you don't want to pay him a 3-year deal and wait for that cliff, but a 1 or 2 year deal, I'm all for it. So yeah, I think overall this makes sense. Hampton is going to be a tough sell for me, depending on how the board plays out. But again, if you're talking about like Daniel Jeremiah's board, I would totally get it. He's pretty fun.
Yeah, just real quick on the Ravens. So they have, like I mentioned, $5 million in cap space. Now they can restructure Lamar's deal, and they can restructure Marlon Humphrey's deal, and they can get to around $40 million in cap space, which is manageable. And then they have some post June 1 cuts they could do. But Mark Andrews is their most obvious cut candidate. So he's on the last year of his contract. So trading him, cutting him post June 1, pre June 1, whatever, they save $11 million in doing that. And the Ravens, Ronnie Stanley is a free agent. Their backup guard, Ben Cleveland, just got arrested for like the 4th time. Patrick McCarry is a free agent. They have a lot of guys who have played very key roles for them who are free agents. None of them really have like a clear replacement like Mark Andrews does. They drafted Isaiah Likely. He's been a good player for them. It makes a lot of sense to cut Mark Andrews or trade him or whatever. I'm less interested in a trade. I don't really want to give up a 4th round pick for Mark Andrews. I would just maybe wait and see if he gets released. And if he is released, definitely makes a lot of sense. So in terms of the on-field production, his yardage total was definitely lower than a few years ago when he had 1,300 yards in Greg Roman's offense, which is insane for a tight end. But he was 4th in yards per reception, 6th in yards per route run, 4th in yards per route run, or excuse me, 5th in yards per route run versus man coverage, 6th in yards per route run versus zone coverage, 7th in contested catch percentage, 7th in first downs created, 1st in ESPN's open score, and 2nd overall. So this is a guy who still is like a very, very good tight end. It's really funny from Chargers fans because like when there was potential like trade conversations, it was like, no, this guy sucks. Like he's not very good. And then after the trade deadline passed, like, why didn't we get Mark Andrews? And then the playoff game happened. And now it's, oh, Mark Andrews sucks. I don't want him. He's a good player. Like he still is probably a top 10 tight end. He's not a top 2 or 3 anymore at this point, but unquestionably would be a significant upgrade for them. And I think he is going to be available. So it's just a matter of if the Chargers want to trade for him and get ahead of that potential free agency market, or do they just kind of wait and see what happens if they cut him?
Yeah, unless Mark Andrews has some like Justin Tucker allegations awaiting him that we don't know about, it would be almost stupid and a complete shock for the Chargers not to bring in Mark Andrews. I would be stunned if they recreated Ravens West with everybody else, but then Mark Andrews,
like the best player,
except for the best player that becomes available when you have tons of money. So I'd be stunned unless Mark Andrews gets a bag with, I don't know, the Panthers, and they just want to spend a ton of money on a player, and he just wants to go chase a bag. Fine. I do not see how he's not a Charger if he's cut. I'd be stunned if he weren't. I would be stunned if the Chargers weren't interested.
Yeah. Yeah. And given like how this regime feels about Mark Andrews, like Greg Roman loves Mark Andrews. And I know it was the Pro Bowl, man, but Justin Herbert sure liked Mark Andrews a whole lot in that game.
Yeah.
So I would absolutely be in favor of it. If they traded for him, you just have the 1-year contract, and maybe that's a better situation for them. You send a 4th round pick, and you just deal with the 1-year, $11 million contract. You draft a tight end on the 3rd round, 4th round. Maybe that's your heir apparent, and then you just kind of roll with it. Maybe that's worth it. I don't really know. I would still prefer a cut, but if they send a 4th round pick to the Ravens and maybe you get back a 6th or something like that, I think that makes sense. But as Jacob points out, I do think there is a market for him. Financially, if he is cut, the tight end market is wild to me. Cole Kmet makes $12.5 million, folks. Like, if Mark Andrews does get cut, I don't think he's going to be as cheap as some people made it out to be. Like when I tweeted it out, they were like, "Oh, sign him for like $4 or $5 million." Like, no, man, the tight end market is crazy. So I think if he does get cut, you're probably looking at like $14-15 million per year. Maybe it's a short-term contract, but he's not getting less money than Cole Kmet makes. I can tell you that right now.
Yeah. You think he'd really get 14?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Who's our leading tight end available in the free agency? Yeah.
I think it's like Mike Gesicki, man. Like we're talking about Juwan Johnson being like, yeah, sign us up, but the tight end free agency room it's really
what are the deals for these guys right now? Let me see rankings. I gotta see what this is,
dude. Evan Ingram is at 13.75 million. Mark Andrews right now is at 14.
But was he cut? That's kind of the part.
Dalton Schultz is at 12. Noah Fant at 10.5. Dawson.
Juwan Johnson really is tight end 1 in free agency. Never mind. Andrew's getting $14 million.
Yeah, dude. The tight end position sucks. It's not good right now. All of the best tight ends in the league, they're all on rookie contracts.
Yeah. And then whatever Kelsey's doing.
He might retire. I don't know. So if Mark Andrews is available, I expect the Chargers to be interested. But I don't want them to get ahead of their skis there and send like a 3rd round pick. Like I would rather have the 3rd round pick plus Juwan Johnson, I think.
3rd round pick plus Johnson. Okay.
Would you rather have Mark Andrews for a 3rd round pick or Juwan Johnson and you keep the 3rd round pick? I don't know, man.
Well, Telesco's not drafting, so let's keep the third rounder.
If Telesco were drafting, I say send that second round pick. I don't care.
That's amazing. Oh man.
Shalister, man, I love that you came in with a super chat. Hell no, there is no world where the Chargers should consider trading Rashawn Slater. Absolutely not. Never.
I've
super chat, but
I've briefly been watching offensive line, right, to try to do something for the draft. And then today the Chargers posted the film breakdown between Alt and Slater watching each other. And just watching Slater's reps and going, God, there ain't shit like that in the draft these days, man. Like what he's able to do right now as a pro, forget about it. No, you don't trade Rashawn Slater. I think Jim Harbaugh would rather like root for Ohio State or hug Trent Baalke than trade an offensive lineman.
Yeah. You can't be an offensive line centric world. Offensive linemen are weapons here, all that stuff, and then trade Rashawn Slater. That just does not compute. So, Rashawn Slater, to me, I've said this before, at his best, he is the best player on the Chargers, and I will live with that take because he is so damn consistent. He did not play well in the playoff game. Neither did anybody else except for Ladd McConkey. But when you look at the season overall, that guy is absolutely a top 3 offensive tackle. Anybody who thinks he's regressed, that I saw that comment online as well. If you think Rashawn Slater has regressed, you do not know shit about football. So Rashawn Slater is awesome. To me, he should get a blank check. I am cool with whatever he wants. And the Chargers should do the same. And if they don't, they are a little hypocritical to me. So I love Rashawn. He's the best player on the team. He should be extended immediately. Any consideration to training him should never, ever, 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 ever happen again. But thank you for the super chat. We really appreciate it.
Slight consideration if this past year he had been awful and injured the entire year and it was another lost season, but he wasn't. So as long as the Chargers trade for Myles Garrett and put him on the Chargers, nothing can stop him.
So, yeah. I love Rashawn. Obviously, I have his jersey behind me. But he's so good, man. And I really do think, like, unequivocally, he's one of the 3 best left tackles in the league. So he's been a Pro Bowler twice. I think he was robbed of an All-Pro nomination this year. Best left tackle in the AFC, bar none.
Yeah.
All right. We got a lot of super chats at the end there, so that's fun. Ivan says Tyler fire CB1. I think he meant for CB1.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I got the height, weight profile of some of these players. Don't have the speed or the vertical or the tenacity or anything. I do know that there's no hot read on a 4-man rush.
I love it how he gets Justin Herbert's getting hit immediately, and this guy's like, throw the hot route. There's no hot route, dude. He's got hit immediately. What are you talking about?
Yeah, that's something. My life has been better since he's been blocked.
Same. Atticus, I do agree with this. I should get a Joe Alt jersey on the opposite side. That'd be really cool. So I will probably look into doing that.
Yeah. Honestly, I'll just do a handstand and distract them. That's... They would be distracted, then they'd kill me.
Mike Evans is gonna run a go route and just see Tyler doing a handstand. He's gonna be like, "What the fuck?"
I'm just doing back handsprings. I'll get a PBU in there somewhere, like do a backflip, and yeah, I can make it work.
Oh man, too good. What a fun way to end the show. I love it.
Yeah, not bad.
All right, we're gonna be back on Thursday. We're gonna start doing some. Essentially like a dueling mock draft when it comes to free agency. We're going to build rosters in free agency and kind of compare them to the other one. And so it should be a fun conversation. Essentially, it's kind of like a build your Madden roster type exercise because the Chargers have a lot of resources. They can sign a lot of free agents if they want to. So I'm really excited about that. If you are listening to this, make sure and leave a rating, review. We do always appreciate that. Hit us up on Twitter. And we can discuss some of these things if you want and let us know in the comments what you thought about some of these cornerback and safety prospects. All right, this has been another episode of the Guilty as Charged podcast. We appreciate you guys so much. We'll see you on Thursday. As always, bolt up.